I'm Sarah Ulmer with YallPolitics, and we are thrilled to be one of the sponsors of the 2020 Mississippi Top 50. This event has become synonymous with celebrating some of Mississippi's most influential people over the years. And of course, the highlight of our event is always our Hall of Fame program. However, none of this would be possible without the support of our sponsors: Atmos Energy, Capital Resources, Mississippi Farm Bureau, the Payne Group, Taller Loan Company, and YallPolitics. While we can't be together in Jackson, we do hope that you'll enjoy our presentation. This year, we are celebrating three great Mississippi men: Judge Reuben Anderson, former Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, and Wert Yerger Jr. All of these men made a historical mark on Mississippi, and we are grateful to be able to bring their presentation to you today. Our first Hall of Fame inductee for 2020 is Justice Reuben Anderson. Anderson was the first African-American man to be appointed to the Mississippi Supreme Court and most recently served as the chairman of the commission to redesign the Mississippi state flag. Justice Reuben Anderson. Mississippi is no stranger to a complicated and segregated past. But for one man, those obstacles did not stand in his way of undeniable success. That is why we are proud to announce Reuben Anderson as part of the Mississippi Top 50 2020 Hall of Fame. Born in 1943 to a bricklayer and the great-grandson of slaves, Reuben Anderson's Mississippi wasn't as welcoming of a place for African Americans as it is today. Still, young Reuben did not let that slow him down. After graduating from Tougaloo College in 1965, Anderson became the first black student to graduate from the University of Mississippi's School of Law in 1967, 5 years after James Meredith integrated Ole Miss.
I grew up in Jackson, went to the Catholic school until I was in the 11th grade. Then I went to the public schools, went to Tougaloo College, and from Tougaloo College, I did a year of law school in Louisiana at Southern University, then Ole Miss.
Anderson went to work practicing with the Mississippi NAACP Legal Defense Fund on desegregation and voter right cases. In 1968, Anderson joined a private law firm, Anderson, Banks, Nichols, and Stewart, where he practiced for 8 years. In 1976, Anderson was appointed as the municipal court judge for the city of Jackson, where he served until he was appointed to the county court in Hinds County, the county circuit court, and then the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, each one a first for an African American. He was then appointed in 1985 by Mississippi Governor William Elaine to the state Supreme Court.
I started out as a civil rights lawyer in 1967 and did that for about 4 or 5 years and went into private practice after that and went on the bench in 1977 and served on the bench for 15 years and been in private practice since then.
In 1991, Judge Anderson retired from the bench to return to private practice with Phelps Dunbar LLP. But his firsts weren't quite over yet. Anderson was chosen as the first African American president of the Mississippi Bar Association in 1997, and in 2007, he was presented the Mississippi Bar Association's Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2009, Anderson was inducted into the National Bar Association Hall of Fame, and 2 years later, the University of Mississippi School of Law Hall of Fame. Anderson has served as chairman of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum and was one of its major fundraisers during development.
I was chairman of the board of trustees of Tougaloo College, and we started an initiative at Tougaloo to build a civil rights museum. And we found out that it was a lot more involved than Tougaloo could accommodate. And Governor Warner and I plotted and schemed and convinced Governor Barber that it was a good thing for Mississippi, and Governor Barber used his influence with the legislature to appropriate the money, and we raised another $20 million, I and Governor Warner and a whole lot of other people. And it's been a huge success. It's a great venue, and it's something that's needed for Mississippi.
When Mississippi needed someone to lead the commission to put forward a new state flag, Judge Anderson was appointed by Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann and named chairman by the commissioners to guide the process. As the Flag Commission wrapped up its work recently, Anderson offered these words.
I grew up in Mississippi in the 40s and 50s, and all of my life, Mississippi has been at the bottom, 50th, in whatever category you can think of, whether income, health care, education. We've always been on the bottom. On November 3rd, I think that'll take a change. We won't move to the top, but I can assure you we will move. And how in the world is it that Mississippi could be on the bottom with all of the tremendous assets and resources that we have? We have the greatest people, the most talented and gifted people, the greatest poets and authors, musicians. We're the birthplace of America's music. We have the most fertile soil. Anything will grow in Mississippi. From cotton to watermelons to catfish, it'll grow here. We have timber and oil and gas, the Mississippi River and 90 miles of beaches. There's no reason for us to be on the bottom. We'll be on the bottom all of my lifetime, but my children and grandchildren will see us ascend. And it'll happen because of what you have done to bring this great object to the people of Mississippi to vote on. I'm so thrilled that you decided to take the flower of the Magnolia Tree, a tree that's been around 90 million years. And the thing about a tree is different than anything else. The oldest living organism on earth is the Mezulum tree that has been growing for 5,000 years in the desert of California. 5,000 years from now, our flag will be growing and showing and blooming. And we'll send a message to all of America that we are open for business. We'll send a message that we live in the future and not in the past.
Judge Reuben Anderson's life of firsts is truly an inspirational story, both for him and the state of Mississippi. That is why we are proud to name him to the 2020 Mississippi Top 50 Hall of Fame. Our next inductee into the Hall of Fame for 2020 is former Senator Trent Lott, who worked his way up as a staffer for a Democratic congressman until he finally became the majority leader as a Republican in the Senate. Senator Trent Lott. Mississippi has often benefited from its U.S. senators having outsized influence in the halls of Congress. But only one senator from the Magnolia State has ever held the title of Senate Majority Leader. The Mississippi Top 50 is proud to name Trent Lott to our 2020 Hall of Fame. Trent Lott was born in Grenada on October 1941. His father was a sharecropper and his mother was a school teacher. The Lott family would move to Pascagoula when Trent was in the 6th grade so that his father could go work at the shipyard. The future senator would go on to attend the University of Mississippi, where he was active in campus life, even cheering on the rebels as a cheerleader.
Well, I lived sort of a typical Mississippi life in the 40s and 50s and 60s. I was born in the Grenada Hospital, but my parents lived out in rural Carroll County, where my mother taught school in a 3-room schoolhouse. My dad drove a school bus, and he raised cotton on somebody else's property, which means he was a sharecropper. And then they moved down to Pascagoula during the war. My dad worked in a shipyard. He was a guard and a pipe fitter. We moved back to North Mississippi. I actually went to second, third, and fourth grade at Duck Hill. And my 3 favorite teachers of my entire life were those 3 teachers at Duck Hill. So I went to school in Grenada and Duck Hill, and then back to Pascagoula. My dad worked in the shipyard. I finished Pascagoula High School, went to Ole Miss, knew I wanted to be a lawyer. Wound up being the cheerleader, head cheerleader at Ole Miss. I don't know how that happened because I could barely even lift my partner up off the ground. In those days, we weren't acrobats.
After he earned his law degree from Ole Miss, he went to work for Congressman William Colmer in 1968. 4 years later, Lott would succeed Colmer, winning the South Mississippi congressional seat as only the third Republican to be elected to Congress in Mississippi since Reconstruction.
I ran as a Republican, which was kind of unheard of in those days, way back in 1972. But I always drew pretty good crowds in places like Lucedale and Poplarville because I was the first live Republican they'd ever seen. And long story short, the people gave me a chance. I got elected to Congress when I was 32.
Lott's strong election win in 1972 earned him a spot on the House Judiciary Committee as a freshman, where he considered the impeachment of former President Richard Nixon before Nixon ultimately resigned. Trent would serve 8 terms in Congress, winning re-election easily each time. After serving as Ronald Reagan's state chairman during the 1980 presidential campaign, Lott became the second highest-ranking Republican in Congress as the House Majority Whip. He was the first Southern Republican to hold the title.
Then I got elected to the Senate in 1988 to succeed the Venerable John Stennis, who was a great American, and served 16 years in the House, 19 years in the Senate, served as whip in the House, whip in the Senate, and majority leader. I've lived the American dream.
In 1988, Lott ran for the U.S. Senate and won. Succeeding retiring Senator John C. Stennis, he would win 3 more terms with very little opposition each time. Lott became the Senate Majority Whip in 1995, and then in 1996, he was named Senate Majority Leader, replacing Bob Dole, who resigned to run for president. Lott won the post over his fellow Mississippian, Senator Thad Cochran. The Mississippi senator would once again be faced with an impeachment trial, this time at the helm of the Republican majority in the U.S. Senate to consider the case against former President Bill Clinton.
Well, I did serve as whip twice, once as minority whip, once as the majority whip in the Senate, and I served for 6.5 years as the majority leader. A good portion of those, beginning in 1996, was when Bill Clinton was president, and then I stayed on to when George W. Bush came in as president and worked with him too. Actually, I had a great working relationship with both of them, especially Slick, that's what I call President Clinton. But one time I was on Meet the Press, and Clinton had done something I didn't like, and so I called him a spoiled brat. So the next morning I called him and said, "Oh, Mr. President, I'm sorry about that. I shouldn't have done that." He said, "Hey, don't worry about it, no problem." But the highlight of my time in the Senate and in the Congress and of my political life was the day that I made the deal working with Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton. It came to an agreement on a balanced budget. We had reformed welfare, we had cut taxes, and we balanced the federal budget. This is in 1998, I guess. Not only did we have a balanced budget for 4 years, we had surpluses for 2 years. That was the thing that motivated me from the beginning. I always felt like it was a mistake for the country, any more than an individual, should not live within their means. And I was worried that at some point, if we kept spending more money than we were taking in and running up the deficit and the debt annually, that the chickens would come home to roost someday, and then my kids or grandkids would have to deal with it. So that's what I went there to do.
Lott would lead the Senate as majority leader until 2001, when Republicans lost the majority, making him the minority leader. He stepped down from Senate leadership in December 2002, but would return as the Senator Minority Whip in January 2007. Lott retired from public service in December of 2007.
I left the leadership in 2002, but I didn't leave. I took over as chairman of the Rules Committee in the Senate, and I just went back to work. 4 years later, 2006, I got reelected by the people of Mississippi, and then I decided there was a vacancy, so I decided I'd run for whip again. In this case, I would be the minority whip. And Mitch McConnell from Kentucky had been elected leader, so I was the whip in 2006 and 7 until the beginning of 2008. I was shocked at how much harder it had gotten to get things done in that 4-year period from 2002 to 2006. All of a sudden, it was harder to move the legislation, and the spirit was meaner. It got to where my colleagues, we didn't want to just defeat somebody on a vote, we wanted to destroy them. And that's why I decided, I've been in Congress 35 years, and I've been a staff member 4 years before that, 39 years. It's a pretty good while to spend in one building in the Capitol.
During his 35 years of service, Trent Lott was at the center of history. Impeachments, Middle East conflicts, wars, terrorism, 9/11, natural disasters, Hurricane Katrina, divisive elections, economic booms, and Wall Street busts.
So, once again, I just think that, God, that was God's plan for me. It was the right thing to do. I don't have any regrets. In fact, one time I talked to Chip Pickering, the congressman, and he was thinking about retiring, and he said, after, some of the things you've been through, my dad had been through, would you do it again? And I said, if I had a chance to do it again and make the same dumb mistakes over again, I'd do it all over.
Through it all, Trent Lott fought for Mississippi and America. He was a strong advocate for national defense and shipbuilding. He advocated for legislation that would help Mississippi businesses and shore up the state's workforce. He championed economic development projects throughout Mississippi and worked to advance education and health care. Lott knew the rules. He knew how to negotiate deals and was considered by his colleagues as the smartest legislator in the room. Few Mississippians have impacted the state as much as Trent Lott, and that is why we are proud to name him to the 2020 Mississippi Top 50 Hall of Fame. Our next inductee into the 2020 Mississippi Top 50 Hall of Fame is Wert Yerger Jr. Once called the George Washington of the Republican Party in Mississippi, Yerger worked to modernize the Republican Party here in the state. He opened the doors for many candidates to run on local, state, and national levels. Wert Yerger Jr. Billy Munger once described Wert Yerger Jr. as the George Washington of the Mississippi Republican Party. There is no doubt the man who recruited both Munger and Clark Reed into the party and served as its founding chairman from 1956 to 1966 deserves such praise. The Mississippi Top 50 Hall of Fame couldn't be a true political Hall of Fame without the induction of Wert Yerger Jr.
There were some legendary men that had started building the party. Wurt Yogurt, right at the forefront. Clark Reed, Billy Munger, God rest his soul. Those men were so important to the state and to the development of the Republican Party. They led the way.
Wurt Yerger is our founding chairman. In 1956, he and a group of other people became involved, and he organized them, and they basically took over the Republican Party from a group that had ran the Mississippi Republican Party from out of state. And so that was the first modern party that we had ever had here, being managed by Mississippians that lived here and worked here and raised their families here. So he literally is the individual that has the membership card that says #1 on it for the Mississippi Republican Party.
Wirt was born in 1930 in the capital city of Jackson to Wert Yerger Sr. and Mrs. Rivers Applewhite Yerger. Wirt is married to Mrs. Mary Yerger and has 3 children, Wirt III, Frank, and Mary. After leaving the military at age 26, Wirt became the first modern chairman of the Mississippi Republican Party. Over the next 10 years, Wirt orchestrated the birth of a true 2-party system in Mississippi.
Had a lot of good help, but it was pretty lonely the first time. Not many people involved. There was just no Republicans around. But I was thankful just to be around to get started with it, and it worked out pretty well. his uncle said, "Are you gonna marry a Republican?" I said, "I don't understand it." But she said she was gonna do it, but it was that's just, you can't imagine what the situation was like back in those days. Republican were a bad situation, bad reception everywhere, but it worked out fine.
After Wirt won the GOP chairmanship, he went to work right away recruiting the first Republican candidates in Mississippi post-Reconstruction.
Well, I had to persuade them, but it was a little bit hard, but it worked out well. But Matt McAllister, of course, won the legislative seat, and then Ruben Phillips was a good candidate. If I could have gotten in to be for local option, he would have been elected. He wouldn't do it. And his uncle was a bootlegger, I think.
Wirt was a leader in the movement to recruit conservative stalwart Senator Barry Goldwater to seek the Republican nomination for president. Upon Goldwater's securing the nomination, Wirt was a member of the National Goldwater Steering Committee.
Well, he was just a great guy, and really he wrote his book Consciously Conservative, which is really good. And it was just he was a wonderful guy personally. It's like my home a couple of times. And if you had a different campaign manager, you could have been elected president. The wrong guy. I'd like to have had the job.
With literally all of the business and political power of the state resting in the hands of Democrats, establishing a two-party system in Mississippi wasn't easy.
It was seriously bad. It eliminated us. So it's hard to believe, really, when you look back on it, that they wanted to outlaw the Republican Party. But it was just it, the way it was.
In 2010, the Mississippi Republican Party honored Yerger by giving him the title Chairman Emeritus.
Well, it was just a mob of people. We had about 1,200 people there in downtown, and they just, I think they thought I was about to die, I guess, and they were very complimentary, but it worked out well. But it was a big event, unforgettable event for me.
Well, they were
Didn't deserve it, but it worked out well.
So when I think about him, I think the biggest example that he set for us is just unwavering commitment and a determination to stand up and to push for the cause that you believe in.
We are thrilled to induct Wert Yerger Jr. into the Mississippi Top 50 2020 Hall of Fame. Thanks again for joining us today for Mississippi Top 50. We hope you'll visit our website at mstop50.com and also visit our Facebook and Twitter pages where you can find out more about this year's honorees as well as the past events. Again, to our sponsors, Atmos Energy, Mississippi Farm Bureau, Capital Resources, the Payne Group, Tower Loan Company, and YallPolitics, we thank you.